The fool is one of the most relatable, intriguing, and recurring figures in the world. There have been fools who have caused surprise and laughter since time immemorial. We worship folly by seeing it in people and in the world, and by willingly displaying it in ourselves. It is one of the timeless archetypes that we all inherit at birth. Many of us suffer from the absence of the fool in our lives. Frenetic and upright, we take ourselves too seriously, trying so hard to conform to a world which promotes workaholism, efficiency, and productivity that we might as well be cogs in a machine. As William Shakespeare said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Forgetting that playfulness is a basic human need, we wonder why we so easily become bored and exhausted, losing all capacity for spontaneity, authenticity, and passion. The antidote to this would be to give the fool archetype some space in our lives, to be in balance, and not become excessively foolish and irresponsible. We need to develop the archetype of the sage, who, despite being wise, recognizes the limits of his knowledge and can laugh at himself every now and then. Archetypes are not part of a mechanical system, but pieces of life itself. Images that are integrally connected to the living individual by the bridge of the emotions. The character of the fool is complex, and various characteristics have been attributed to the fool. That he is dull-witted, inarticulate, unable to conform to the conventional standards of behavior, and that he has a natural simplicity and innocence of heart. The derivation of the word fool is the Latin phallus, meaning a pair of bellows expelling empty air. Extended to people, it implies an empty-headed person with insubstantial thoughts. At the same time, bellows furnish the oxygen needed for combustion in much the same way that the fool fires us up. In 1511, the Dutch scholar Erasmus published In Praise of Folly, which became hugely popular and is a profoundly penetrating examination of the fool in Western literature. Folly introduces herself, and since nobody ever praises folly, she begins by praising herself, arguing that life would be dull without her. Folly criticizes everyone, and Erasmus's close friends warned him of the possible dangers of attacking the church. However, even religious figures found the work amusing. Friendship and marriage contain a certain amount of folly, because we tend to overlook the defects of our friends and loved ones, and consider them small vices in comparison to other people. Intellectuals are foolish in their pursuit of knowledge, spending years going to the library, doing research, thinking that what they are doing is tremendously important, so that a few other intellectuals over the course of a century will read their book and think very highly of it. Folly compares philosophers to theater critics who unmask the characters on stage and ruin the actor's performance. They are boring and annoying. Philosophers don't seem to understand how the illusions that help make life bearable are useful even if they distort reality. The fool seems to be infinitely freer and happier than those who are burdened by wisdom. They are the life of the party. Fools always speak the truth because they lack the wisdom to craft lies and seek to manipulate others. In essence, there is nothing that can make life happier than the joy that accompanies laughter and play. Folly is not merely universal, but necessary and even desirable to humanity. To be a person is nothing other than to play the fool, and to acknowledge this very fact is the highest form of wisdom. The fool represents a nostalgic return to a simpler way of life, a wisdom that comes not from the mind but from the heart. Sometimes the down-to-earth and simple-minded, in their purity of heart, can penetrate to profounder truths than those encumbered with learning and convention. In the same way, we sometimes sense a more resonant truth in popular proverbs than in rational exposition. Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky writes, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool, a faculty unheard of nowadays." In literature, wise characters sometimes depict insanity, and madmen express wisdom. The oxymoron, wise fool, is a literal paradox where the character who is identified as a fool comes to be regarded as the beholder of wisdom. People sometimes accuse wise people of insanity in order to conceal their unwanted wisdom. either fearing the harsh words on many controversial topics or simply to punish them for speaking boldly. The archetypal wise fool is Socrates. Not only was his educational method based on exposing the folly of the supposedly wise, but he himself claimed that his own wisdom was derived from an awareness of his ignorance. Knowledge of ignorance is itself a kind of knowledge. As Shakespeare writes, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." There are two ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other is to refuse to believe what is true. When there's an uncomfortable truth that needs to be spoken, and those in power are afraid to speak about it, it is usually the fool who steps in. There is something heroic about this. It is the fool who speaks a truth nobody else dares to utter. And this brings instant relief, because people know it has to be said. Generally speaking, we can distinguish between two types of fools. The natural fool, who lacks social awareness and occasionally utters the truth, being unaware of social conventions. And the professional fool, whose job it is to make harsh truths more palatable by disguising them with humor and wit. One follows his heart, the other his mind. The greatest fools are often cleverer than the people who laugh at them. The fool is fearless in speaking the truth. In fact, the great secret of the successful fool is that he is no fool at all. As the great English visionary artist William Blake writes, "If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise." The fool, the clown, and the trickster share similar traits. They are sources of humor, inevitably eliciting laughter, serving as catalysts for comic catharsis. However, they also express a duality: folly and non-folly, order and disorder. What may seem like a joke can in fact be a warning. Danish theologian and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard writes, "A fire broke out backstage in a theater. The clown came out to warn the public. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He repeated it. The acclaim was even greater. I think that's just how the world will come to an end, to general applause from wits who believe it's a joke." Professional fools can bring a sense of awareness to what is going on in the world and where we are headed. Many of them, however, come from a place of tragedy. The contradictory association between comedy and mental disorders, such as depression and anxiety, is known as the sad clown paradox, where comedy can act as a defense mechanism to remove suppressed feelings of rage and aggression. People may respond with laughter at the clown, yet harbor feelings of pity, fear, or repulsion, evoking ambivalent reactions. Some people, in fact, suffer from coulrophobia, the overwhelming fear of clowns. In this day and age, clowns are a constant source of horror in books and movies. Perhaps this is because the modern clown's role is always the same: to entertain others by being the subject of laughter, and he is not always successful at it. The clown has to sacrifice his well-being by always having to put on the same face and play the same character. This one-sidedness can take its toll mentally, and the clown slowly becomes enveloped by his shadow, the dark side of his personality. The evil clown archetype is best portrayed in the Joker, one of the most recognizable villain characters in popular culture. In medieval theater, clowns would not only make spectators laugh, but sometimes also snatch them off with them into a hell mouth, the entrance of hell envisaged as the gaping mouth of a monster, which scared the audiences. Thus, their light and dark sides were balanced. The fool and the trickster have a few psychological differences as well. Generally speaking, the fool is presented as an innocent or naive figure who wouldn't hurt a fly, while the trickster is intentionally deceptive and seeks to trick others and laugh at them. The trickster loves engaging in what the Germans call Schadenfreude, literally harm joy, in which one obtains pleasure from learning or witnessing the misfortunes, failures, or humiliation of another person. A trickster may console others when they fail, and hide that internally he feels joy. When there is an opportunity to play a trick on another person, the trickster immediately seizes the opportunity. The fool, however, is not interested in laughing at a person, but rather laughing with the person or laughing at himself. To laugh at oneself helps to break the ice, because it not only removes one's own persona, but also the audience's social mask, allowing for genuine behavior. This courageous feat throws one in a vulnerable state, which allows others to open up and receive a message more. The Fool represents a nostalgic return to a simpler way of life, a wisdom that comes not from the mind, but from the heart. It is often the down-to-earth and simple-minded, in their purity of heart, who can penetrate to profounder truths than those encumbered with learning and rigid convention. In the same way, we sometimes sense a more resonant truth in a popular proverb than in a lengthy, rational exposition. The Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky recognized this power, stating, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool, a faculty unheard of nowadays." In literature, this paradox flourishes. Wise characters sometimes appear to depict insanity, and madmen often express profound wisdom. This leads us to the oxymoron, the wise fool, a literal paradox where the character who is identified as a fool is ultimately regarded as the beholder of true wisdom. Historically, people sometimes accuse the wise of insanity to conceal that unwanted wisdom, either fearing the harsh words on controversial topics or simply to punish them for speaking boldly. The archetypal wise fool is arguably Socrates. His entire educational method was based on exposing the folly of the supposedly wise, and he himself famously claimed that his own wisdom was derived from an awareness of his ignorance. Knowledge of ignorance is, in itself, a fundamental kind of knowledge. As Shakespeare so succinctly wrote, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." There are two primary ways to be fooled. One is to believe what isn't true. The other, and perhaps more common today, is to refuse to believe what is true. When there is an uncomfortable truth that needs to be spoken, a truth that those in power are afraid to utter, it is almost always the fool who steps in. There's something profoundly heroic about this. It is the fool who speaks a truth nobody else dares to utter, and this instantly brings relief because people instinctively know it had to be said. Generally speaking, we can distinguish between two critical types of fools. First, the natural fool, who genuinely lacks social awareness and occasionally blurts out the truth, is simply unaware of social conventions. And second, the professional fool, whose job it is to make harsh truths more palatable by disguising them with humor and wit. One follows their heart, the other, strategically, follows their mind. The greatest fools are often cleverer than the people who laugh at them. The fool is fearless in speaking the truth. In fact, the great secret of the successful fool is that he is no fool at all. As the great English visionary artist William Blake asserts, if the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise. The fool, the clown, and the trickster share similar traits. They are universal sources of humor, inevitably eliciting laughter and serving as catalysts for a comic catharsis. However, they always express a powerful duality: folly and non-folly, order and disorder. What may seem like a simple joke can, in fact, be a deep warning. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once wrote of a fire breaking out backstage in a theater. The clown came out to warn the public, but they thought it was a joke and applauded. He repeated it, and the acclaim was even greater. Kierkegaard concluded that this is just how the world will end, to general applause from wits who believe it's a joke. Professional fools have the unique ability to bring a sense of awareness to what is happening in the world and where we are collectively headed. Yet, many of them come from a place of tragedy. The contradictory association between comedy and serious mental disorders, such as depression and anxiety, is known as the sad clown paradox. Here, comedy acts as a defense mechanism to remove suppressed feelings of rage and aggression. Audiences might laugh at the clown, yet they often harbor feelings of pity, fear, or repulsion, evoking deeply ambivalent reactions. In the modern age, the clown has tragically become a constant source of horror in books and movies. Perhaps this shift occurred because the modern clown's primary role is simply to entertain others by becoming the subject of laughter, a role in which they're not always successful. The modern clown often sacrifices their own well-being, always having to put on the same face and play the same forced character. This one-sidedness can take a heavy toll mentally. The clown slowly becomes enveloped by his shadow, the dark, suppressed side of his personality. The evil clown archetype, perhaps best portrayed by the Joker, is the manifestation of this imbalance. In medieval theater, clowns balanced these forces. They would not only make spectators laugh, but also snatch them off, taking them into the Hellmouth, the entrance of hell, which terrified the audiences. In this way, their light and dark sides were held in balance. The fool and the trickster share traits, but they have distinct psychological differences. The fool is typically presented as an innocent or naive figure who wouldn't intentionally hurt anyone. The trickster, however, is intentionally deceptive. He seeks to trick others and then laugh at their expense. The trickster loves engaging in what the Germans call Schadenfreude, literally harm joy, in which one obtains pleasure from witnessing the misfortunes, failures, or humiliation of another person. A trickster may outwardly console others when they fail, but internally feel joy at the misfortune. The fool, by contrast, is not interested in laughing at a person. He prefers to laugh with the person or simply to laugh at himself. To laugh at oneself helps to break the social ice because it removes not only one's own protective persona, but also the audience's social mask, allowing for genuine, vulnerable behavior. This courageous act allows others to open up and receive a message more profoundly. While the fool generally seeks to entertain others and is often the butt of the joke, the trickster's primary aim is to entertain himself, even if it is at the expense of others. The fool has an essential ability to find humor even in difficult situations, which radiates hope to those around him. In a tense atmosphere, the person who risks making a joke, even if it means making a fool of himself, does so not just for personal relief, but to bring essential relief to others. When a person acts foolishly through some clear outward action, it is immediately apparent to the audience. With the trickster, the motive is more ambiguous. He plays like a fool in order to manipulate people into his trap. The trickster targets those who never expect to be tricked. In medieval times, the court jester's job was to entertain the aristocracy with satire, comedy, music, and acrobatics. It was commonly believed that keeping a fool on the premises warded off the evil eye. This is more than just superstition. It represents a profound psychological truth. It's a good idea to place the fool out front, where we can keep an eye on him. We must make room for the renegade factor in ourselves and admit it to our inner court, where it can bring us fresh ideas and new energy. Without the fool's blunt observations and essential playfulness, our inner landscape risks becoming a sterile wasteland. The fool held an invaluable position in the royal court, uniquely given permission by the king to speak the truth. He was both an insider and an outsider, the one person able to ridicule the very person he served, though always cloaked in humor. Anyone who dares to challenge others or the status quo is often instantly considered a fool by those who are too afraid to speak out and risk their own reputation by being authentic. To signal his special privileges, the fool often imitated the king's regalia with a captain in bells and a bauble. Jesters were close to the king and were often free from immediate punishment, allowed to speak without fear. Yet, history tells us that some still went too far and paid the ultimate price. Fools ultimately represent the values that are rejected by the group because they oppose rigid social norms and rules. They are seen as incompetent and often ostracized for their rebelliousness. However, every healthy social group must have such a figure because they are essential agents of change. The very vitality of a culture requires space for figures whose function is to uncover and disrupt the things that the culture takes for granted. This profound journey of the fool finds its purest expression in the tarot. The Fool, numbered 0, is typically the first of the 22 major arcana cards. He is often depicted holding a white rose, symbolizing innocence and purity, and carrying a small bundle of possessions. He is willing to sacrifice everything for the trip, walking merrily, looking up at the sky, utterly absorbed in all the great adventures that await him. The tarot is often called the Fool's Journey. This journey is similar to the monomyth of the hero's journey. in which the hero must leave the safety and comfort of the ordinary world and enter into the unknown and difficult territory of the special world. Here, he must defeat his dragon, his worst fear, an event, or a memory long avoided, and gather the treasure hard to attain. The journey is a psychological and spiritual death and rebirth, where an old aspect of oneself dies, giving birth to a new and far more capable self. The fool is heroic because he is the one who initiates this process. He is the first one to jump off the place of comfort and into the place of the unknown. Psychologically, the archetype of the fool is the precursor to all transformation. Nothing truly new would ever start without the fool. As pioneers have shown, inventors and geniuses have almost always been looked on as no better than fools at the beginning of their career and very frequently at the end of it also. The soul, writes Jung, demands your folly, not your wisdom. To embark on a journey of self-discovery is traditionally considered foolish. Society expects us to follow a linear path: education, career, family, and so on. When a person deviates from this path, he is instantly seen as a fool whose unconventional adventures will surely lead to nothing but poverty and misery. But the first step is always the hardest and the most important. As the Chinese proverb reminds us, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The fool thinks of all the wonderful adventures that lie ahead and is less worried about making mistakes. He is energetic, urging us to live life to the fullest. The person who thinks too much, who is overcautious, remains stagnant. It is the fear of uncertainty that paralyzes so many of us. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Failure, however, can open new doors we never imagined. What we think of abstractly as absolute failure may, in fact, lead to unimaginable success. As the alchemist said, "In filth it will be found what you need most is to be found where you least wish to look." The fool lives in the moment and sees reality as it is. He is unafraid of change and exploring new territory. No matter how many times he stumbles, the fool keeps going. In the end, it is the journey that truly matters.